Hello, it's Simon Zutshi here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the UK buy-to-let property crisis. What does it mean for you and for your property investing? Is this why so many landlords are selling up? And what's this going to do for the UK housing market? Is the UK housing market in danger? And will this ultimately lead to a property market crash in 2023 or a housing market crash in 2024, which many people are predicting? Well, what I want to do is I want to simplify this. I'm going to go back to some of the buy-to-let basics, and I think it's really important we define exactly what do we mean by buy-to-let, and then we look at exactly what is this UK buy-to-let property crisis. Because there are many different buy-to-let investment strategies. A buy-to-let property is one typically that you acquire a property you're going to rent out to other people. You are not going to live there. If you live in a home, that's seen as your own residence. Now, you can have a combination of the two. When I started to invest back in 1995, my first property was my home. And because I like other people, I like the company, I rented out 2 of the rooms in my own home to friends of mine who were still at universities. They were kind of like lodgers in my property. And I only became what I call a proper landlord in 1998, when I moved out of that first house into another house closer to Cadbury's, where I was working in Birmingham, and I kept the first house and I rented it to students. So I became a student HMO. So in a way, I was what a lot of people call an accidental landlord. Okay, although I did have the plan and the intention to acquire a big portfolio, because I remember meeting my student landlord when I was at university, and he had about 100 houses in Selly Oak, which is where I was just next to the university where I was studying, and he was a very wealthy guy, and I thought, wow, this is good. And a little seed went into my head, thought, one day when I have enough money, I want to get into property. Now, that's another myth, by the way. You don't actually need to have a lot of money to get into property. Usually, to buy a property, when you're looking at the buy-to-let basics, you might buy an investment where you get a 75% mortgage from a bank and you get a 25% deposit. And interestingly, it doesn't really matter so much how much you earn. Some lenders, they want to see an income, but some lenders, they really look at the investment property instead rather than you, because it's the tenants in the property that are going to be paying you rent that's going to give you more than enough money to pay the buy-to-let mortgage every single month. So buy-to-let, a lot of people think about it as renting out to, a couple or a family. It's what we call a single let property. And it's actually single let properties where there's this real UK buy-to-let property crisis right now. There are other buy-to-let investment strategies, such as houses of multiple occupation, where we take a slightly larger house and we rent out the individual rooms to individual tenants. Now, HMOs give us a much higher cash flow than a normal buy-to-let single-let property might do. So whilst single-let properties, and by the way, about 82% of landlords in the UK just have single-let properties. If you've watched my YouTube videos and other YouTube videos, if you go to property network meetings, you'll be aware of strategies such as HMOs and serviced accommodation, where you rent short-term instead of long-term contracts, use them for holidaymakers and contractors, and both HMOs and serviced accommodation give a very high cash flow. You might assume that that's what all investors do, but it's not the case. The vast majority of landlords, they just have single-let properties because it's very much the easiest and probably low-hassle property investment strategy you can possibly do. HMOs and serviced accommodation, you need to treat them more like a business. They are more work, but they also make a lot more money. But the reality is, most landlords only have single-let properties, and that's why most landlords are feeling this UK buy-to-let property crisis right now. So, it's caused by several factors. First of all, let's go back to April 2017, where the UK government introduced something called Section 24. Now, I'm sure you've watched my previous videos and you should understand all about Section 24. In case you don't, let me summarize very, very quickly. If you have buy-to-let properties in your own name, which always was the best way to buy buy-to-let property previously, and if you have a buy-to-let mortgage on that property, and if you are a higher rate taxpayer, what Section 24 means is you pay more tax on your buy-to-let profits. Now, that was phased in April 2017 over 4 years. And to be honest, most people didn't really feel the effect of Section 24 until the last year or two. And the reason they didn't really feel that was because for many, many landlords, and there was something like almost 2 million private landlords in the UK, for many of those people, they had very low mortgages. And that's because for the last 10 years, the Bank of England base rate has been at 0.5%. So most people might have had what's called a standard variable mortgage that varies as the Bank of England rate goes up or down, and it was fixed at 0.5% for many, many years. So what that means is maybe they were paying Bank of England base rate plus maybe 1.5 or 2%. So the effective pay rate for many buy-to-let investors was about 2 to 3%. And they're renting the property out, making really good cash flow on that property. However, in February 2022, we start to see the interest rates go up, such that now the Bank of England base rate is 5.25%. It's the highest it's been since 2009. Prior to the credit crunch in 2007, 2008, Bank of England base rate was always about 5-6%. So people were used to that. But for the last decade, the landlords have been used to this very, very low base rate, which meant pretty much all properties made some positive cash flow every single month. However, with the Bank of England base rate going up over the last 18 months or so, what it means right now is anyone who's got a buy-to-let property that's just a single let, they might well have the scenario that instead of paying 2-3% on the mortgage, they may be paying something like 7 or even 8% on their mortgage. So their mortgage payments, what they're paying each month on an interest-only buy-to-let mortgage, has tripled. What that means is for many landlords, what they're paying on their mortgage each month is more than the rental income coming in. So that property is no longer making positive cash flow every single month, which is one of the things you should do when you're investing in property. And in fact, if you've read my book, Property Magic, you'll remember the 5 golden rules. And golden rule number 3 is we only ever buy a property that makes us positive cash flow. So when you look at the rent that comes in each month, you take off the monthly management fees because you've got someone else looking after it for you. You take off the maintenance, the insurance, and obviously the mortgage on your buy-to-let property. There should be some profit left over. And that's been the case for many, many years. But now, that's not the case. So there are some people who get hit by this, what I call the double whammy. So they've got a buy-to-let property that is not making any monthly cash flow anymore because the interest rate has gone up so much. But on paper, because of Section 24, that property is making a profit. What that means is at the end of the tax year, those buy-to-let landlords are going to have to pay tax to the taxman, even though they've not actually made any profit on their property. Now, I'm sure there'll be lots of tenants out there who might think, ha, serves the landlords right, because there's a lot of people out there, a lot of tenants who kind of bash landlords, and the media bash landlords, and actually the government probably bash landlords, and people say, oh, they're making all this money. And what people fail to understand is the basic economics that in the UK, there is not enough accommodation. There is a shortage of accommodation. The UK government predict we need about 300,000 new homes every single year, but we're only building between 150 and 200,000. And it's because we have a general increasing population. It's a very popular island to live on in the UK. A lot of people come here, want to live in the UK because you have free education, you have free housing, you have free money. If you don't have a job, you know, it's a very good place to live. The weather's not so good, but apart from that, it's pretty good really. And it's fairly politically stable. So we have this increasing population, but a finite amount of accommodation. So over the long term, property prices rise. If it wasn't for private landlords providing buy-to-let property as accommodation, there would be a massive shortage of accommodation. And because of the short supply, rents would be even higher. So all those people are saying, oh, they shouldn't be private landlords. Actually, they'd be paying far more rent if they weren't buy-to-let landlords providing accommodation. So it's really important to understand that. And we're seeing, because more and more landlords are selling up because they're just not making money on their property, there's increased legislation coming in. So we have things like the Renter Reform Bill, which is changing the way we contract with our tenants. We have things like the requirement for EPC There's energy performance certificates to be at a level C. Now, they were talking about making that by 2025. They now pushed that back to 2028. But all this increased legislation, the changing in taxations, there are more and more buy-to-let landlords who are thinking, you know what, actually, I've done really well for my property over the last 10, 20 years. Maybe it's time to sell my property and retire. So we're seeing more and more landlords selling property. Now, what does this actually mean for you as a property investor, if that's what you want to do? Well, as I said, if there's less supply, it means that rents are actually going to go up. So those of us who are still in the game, it's kind of good for us. It's not so good for the tenants, unfortunately, because less supply means that rents are going to go up. But also, it means there are more and more properties coming onto the market for sale. Now, there's always a strong demand of people who want to buy property, but actually at the moment, there's a real problem with people buying, i.e. their first home, or even buying investment properties, especially if they're buying single-let, buy-to-let properties, because often the mortgages don't stack up. The interest rates are so high, and the stress tests that lenders use when they're giving a buy-to-let mortgage means that the properties just don't make enough cash flow. So there are people who want to buy properties, but they can't buy properties because they can't get finance. So the average statistic in the UK prior to the pandemic was about 1 in 3 property sales fall through. So someone's looking to sell a property, they get a sale agreed, 1 in 3 of those will get to the point where it doesn't actually complete because the sale falls through. And one of the main reasons that people fail to buy property is struggling to get the finance. So with an increased difficulty getting finance, I think we're going to see an increase in the number of properties that are falling through, maybe up to 1 in 2. So 50% of sales that are agreed might well fall through. So more property coming back onto the market for sale. And although there is an underlying pent-up demand in the UK, if people aren't physically able to buy the property, well, it means the property market comes to a bit of a standstill and property prices come down to the point such that it's a really good deal and someone finds the money to buy those properties. So this is why we're going to see property prices continue to decline, especially why interest rates are really high, till they get to a point where suddenly it's a good price and then we'll get more buyers coming back into the market. I can tell you from my first-hand experience running 50 plus network meetings all around the UK, I'm in a kind of a unique position. I have my ear to the ground and I know all around the UK there are a lot of investors who are saying, you know what, because of all this uncertainty, we're going to sit back and we're just going to wait. We're going to wait and see what happens to the property market. So again, that's people who want to acquire property. They want to build portfolios, but because of the uncertainty right now, because of the high interest rates, because the market's coming down, they're sitting back and waiting. So again, this means less people wanting to buy property, which is why property prices are going to come down further. Now, is this going to cause a housing price crash? Well, I don't know. Nobody knows what's going to happen to the property market. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. We can always guess. We can look at what's happened in the past. And back in 2008 was the last property market crash. But it was very different circumstances. We had a lot of people who had borrowed more than they could afford. There was lots of irresponsible lending and borrowing. You could get a buy-to-let mortgage for 90% loan to value, whereas for the last 15 years, really, you have to put a larger deposit in, typically 25%, and get a 75% mortgage. So lots of properties have a lot of equity in them because values have gone up over the last 15 years. So you've got to be careful when wanting to invest in property who you listen to. There are lots of people out there who are putting up YouTube videos and they might have been very successful in the last 5 or 10 years, but you know what? Any idiot can buy property when the market's going up. When the market's coming down, which is what's happening right now, we might need to use different strategies. And I'm going to be putting out a number of videos over the next couple of weeks about what I believe are some of the best strategies you can use in the current UK property market to make the most of this buying opportunity. Because I do think it's a buying opportunity. With the less people in the market, amateurs standing back, people struggling to get finances, there are ways that we can use to acquire properties. I'll give you a little hint here. Things like vendor finance, strategies such as purchase lease options. These are more advanced strategies which most people don't know about, or even if they know about them, they've heard about them, they certainly haven't done them. And if you haven't done a purchase lease option, I'd say, well, actually, you don't know enough about it. So I'm putting some more training out over the next few weeks. Do look out for that. And by the way, on that note, you might want to like this video. Do come and comment. Tell me if you agree. Tell me if you disagree. And also, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon, because I want to make sure we bring out lots of video that's very timely. We've got a great video about the interest rate update. You might want to maybe watch that video next, because these are things you need to understand if you're an investor, if you're looking to get into the market, or if you're an investor looking to sell and exit the buy-to-let market. So I really would encourage you to watch the videos on my channel. Please do like the video, subscribe, and maybe hit the bell icon to make sure you're notified whenever videos come out. Until the next time, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. I do hope you got massive value from watching this YouTube video. I'd encourage you to click on the link below to come and do the online training with me. And I've got another video lined up for you, which I think is also going to be really useful, that you should watch once you've registered for the online training with me. So invest with knowledge, invest with skill. I'll see you very soon.